We don't need lazy people like you slowing us down. You're fired.
I understand.
The hiss of the espresso machine was the only sound in the break room that morning, sharp and rhythmic, like pressure building before a blowout. I remember thinking the steam line needed replacing before realizing the real pressure was about to come from something far less mechanical. I was stirring oat milk into my cup when the glass door slid open and Ethan Voss walked in, wearing the kind of confidence only inheritance can buy. He didn't greet me, didn't even pretend, just watched me the way a man studies a switch he's about to flip. "Caleb," he said flatly. "My office. Now." No please, no context, just a command from a 32-year-old who thought titles equaled wisdom. I followed, still holding my coffee. Still half asleep to the idea that after 11 years at Voltaris Energy, I was about to become redundant. Ethan didn't sit when we reached his office. He stood behind the desk, arms folded, and delivered the line like he was reading from a cold script. "You're fired. We don't need dead weight slowing the grid." I blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me," he replied, flipping through a stack of unsigned reports. "Pack up and leave immediately." The words landed harder than I expected, though I kept my voice even. The hum of the air vents filled the silence between us, like static before a storm. I could have listed every system I'd built, every field team I'd trained, every crisis I'd patched when the real leaders were asleep, but what was the point? So I smiled. Controlled, polite, surgical. "Understood," I said, setting my mug on his desk. "Have a productive day, Mr. Voss." As I walked out, my team looked up from their monitors, confusion flickering in their eyes. I gave a small shake of my head. "Don't make this harder." The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft chime that felt almost merciful. Outside, the cold wind hit my face like a reset switch. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and muttered. Funny how the man who's never seen a turbine calls me lazy. The city wind carried the smell of metal and rain, sharp, clean, almost forgiving, for a moment. I just stood there, feeling the hum of power lines overhead and the silence that follows an ending. Some moments don't explode, they just flicker, quietly, like the lights before a storm. If you've ever had a day like that when everything changes in one quiet second, tell me. Where are you watching from right now? And if you want to see how this current flows next, hit subscribe. The story's only just beginning. That's when my phone rang. Arthur Voss, the founder himself. His voice was tight, urgent. "Caleb, why did you leave?" What the hell did my son just do? The city looked different that night, sharper somehow. Like every light had been turned up a little too high, from my apartment window. The skyline of Voltaris Energy's headquarters blinked in and out of the haze, that proud blue logo pulsing against the clouds like a heartbeat that didn't realize it was dying. I sat by the window, coffee cooling beside me, the reflection of the neon sign outside cutting through the steam. The hum from the substation down the street was steady, predictable, the only sound that still made sense. Machines respected rules, humans didn't. Somewhere across town, Arthur Voss, the real founder of Voltaris and father to the boy who just fired me, was flipping through the contract I'd written 6 years ago. A small clause buried on page 42, sole authorization for Helix Grid Negotiations, Caleb Drayton. Back then, it was just a precaution. Now it was a live circuit. Arthur must have read it twice, maybe 3 times. Before the realization hit, Ethan hadn't just made a bad call. He had shut down the only channel through which Voltaris could legally finalize a multi-billion-dollar partnership. I leaned back, watching the red glow from the transformer dance across my ceiling. It was funny, in a dark sort of way. I'd spent more than a decade making sure energy flowed where it needed to go, protecting systems from shorts and overloads, but no one had written a safeguard against incompetence. Somewhere, Arthur was probably shouting, lawyers were probably panicking, and Ethan, the golden son, was realizing he'd just detonated a corporate bomb with his own signature. I imagined him pacing, slick suit and perfect haircut, trying to fix what arrogance had broken. The buzz of the substation deepened, a low electrical growl vibrating through the floorboards. It matched my heartbeat, slow but heating up. I wasn't angry yet, not the kind that burns. It was quieter than that. The kind of fury that doesn't flare, it settles, precise and focused. I glanced at the window, caught my reflection in the glass-tired eyes. Calm face. I raised my mug slightly, like a toast. At least the grid still respects continuity, I murmured, letting the sarcasm slide off my tongue. Shame the company forgot how it works. Right on cue. My phone began to vibrate. Once, twice, again. Ethan Voss. Legal department, communications. 9 missed calls in 10 minutes. I didn't pick up. The screen glowed brighter with each notification, flooding the room in pale blue light. For a moment, it looked like a control panel about to overload. I watched it pulse, steady and relentless, then whispered, almost amused, "You wanted control. Ethan, looks like you just lost power." When Arthur called the next morning, his voice carried the kind of fatigue that only comes from realizing your empire is one signature away from collapse. "Caleb," he said quietly, "we need you back. The Helix Grid team refuses to proceed without your authorization. You're the only name they'll recognize for a long moment." I said nothing. I stared at the coffee in my cup, now black and cold, and listened to the low hum of the city outside. The power grid never slept, it just rerouted, adapted, kept the current moving. People could learn a thing or two from that. "I'll come in," I finally said, "but on one condition, full autonomy. I handle the deal my way, and your son stays out of it." Arthur didn't argue. There was a pause, then a slow exhale. "Agreed," he said. "You'll have whatever you need." By noon, I was walking through the glass doors of Voltaris Energy for the first time since being escorted out like a malfunctioning appliance. The hum of the building hit me instantly, the familiar mix of servers, air vents, and nervous ambition. Every head turned. People paused mid-conversation, eyes flicking toward me like they'd just seen a ghost wired back into the system. I kept my pace even, deliberate. In the corner of the lobby, near the security desk, I spotted a small frame half buried beneath paperwork, a photo from the company's early years. Me, Arthur, and the original field team standing in front of the first Voltaris turbine prototype, all grinning through wind and grease. Back when we believed the system was fair, that effort meant stability. I brushed the frame gently with my fingertips, then kept walking. Arthur was waiting outside the boardroom. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of succession visible in his posture. "They're waiting for you," he said simply. Inside. The Helix Grid delegation sat poised and patient, their lead negotiator already flipping through contract drafts. I placed my notes on the table, took a slow breath, and began calm, precise, methodical. Years of discipline clicked back into place like a familiar circuit finding its current. Halfway through the meeting, the door swung open. Ethan Voss, in his immaculate suit, strode in as if the room still belonged to him. The Helix Grid executives turned, visibly startled. "I'll take it from here," he said, too smoothly, before anyone could respond. Arthur stepped forward from the back of the room, voice low but cutting. "No, you won't." The silence that followed was electric. Ethan froze, his polished confidence short-circuiting in real time. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. This negotiation belongs to Caleb. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned and left, the door closing behind him like a breaker snapping shut. For the first time in days, I felt the current flow again, steady, controlled, entirely mine. The conference room smelled faintly of new leather and filtered air, the expensive kind that hides nerves and ambition in equal measure. The Helix Grid negotiation had been going on for 2 hours, but it might as well have been choreography. Every question landed exactly where I expected. Every counterpoint had its answer waiting. The numbers aligned, the clauses balanced, the language was precise. Years of structuring deals like this had taught me one simple truth: systems only break when people get careless. Today, I wasn't giving the universe that chance. Across the table, the Helix Grid delegation sat composed but visibly impressed. Their lead negotiator, a sharp man named Soren, leaned back, tapped the final page of the draft, and smiled. Clean. He said, "No wasted energy." That was the highest praise you could get from a man who spent his life calculating megawatts. Arthur, seated at the head of the table, met my eyes and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of trust restored. Then, with the faint scrape of his pen against the paper, he signed. Soren followed. Just like that, the deal was sealed. Voltaris Energy had been pulled back from the brink. For a moment, the room exhaled. Applause broke out, polite but genuine. I stood, shook hands, exchanged thanks, and allowed a faint smile, professional focus, measured and calm, nothing more. But inside, a different current flickered, not pride exactly, but something sharper. I had saved the company that had discarded me 48 hours ago, and the irony hummed beneath the surface like a well-tuned generator. As the clients filed out, my team surrounded me, shaking hands, laughing too loudly. The moment felt electric until I caught a look from across the room. 2 colleagues whispered near the projector, glancing my way. One of them, a younger analyst I'd mentored years ago, muttered under his breath, not realizing I could hear. Guess the old current still flows. It wasn't meant as an insult, but it lingered. Old current, the phrase stung with a quiet truth. I was still part of the grid, but maybe not for long. The room emptied gradually. I stayed behind to collect my notes, the adrenaline cooling into stillness. Outside the glass wall, the office buzzed like a hive, newly awakened, the tension replaced by optimism. Yet beneath that hum, something felt off. Back at my desk, a single notification blinked on my monitor. Expense report declined, administrative discrepancy. I frowned. It was the travel reimbursement for the Helix Grid meetings routine paperwork. Filed weeks ago. A small thing. But in Voltaris, small things didn't happen by accident. I reopened the report, scrolling through the reason code. Documentation error requires review. My jaw tightened. Every receipt was correct. Every timestamp verified. Someone had gone out of their way to flag it. The applause from the boardroom still echoed faintly in my head. But now, it sounded less like celebration and more like static. It started small, too small to call sabotage at first. A missing attachment here, a mislabeled document there. I told myself it was coincidence, a clerical glitch, maybe even my own oversight. But patterns have a way of revealing intent, and this one grew clearer by the day. Someone was tampering with my work. By the 3rd week after the Helix Grid signing, I stopped pretending not to notice. Reports I'd finalized were returning to me altered, sentences rewritten. Numbers shifted just enough to spark confusion. A client summary disappeared from the shared server entirely, and every trail led back to one familiar access point, the administrative portal tied to Ethan's office. I began logging everything, every login timestamp, every edit history, every digital fingerprint I could trace, not on the company network, not in a spreadsheet that could vanish with one keystroke, but in a small, battered leather notebook I'd kept since my field days. I flipped it open each night at my kitchen table, the faint hum of the power lines outside filling the silence. Paper never crashes, I muttered, as I wrote. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough. In Voltaris, proof mattered more than truth. One night, around 10:30, I opened my laptop to review the next day's client brief. A new email sat at the top of my sent folder, one I hadn't written. It was addressed to Helix Grid's financial director and contained several incorrect figures. Bad figures, the kind that could fracture trust in seconds. My blood went cold. Before I could react, my phone rang. The caller ID glowed with Helix Grid's country code. I answered. "Caleb," the voice said, calm but heavy. "We just received your message. I didn't expect those changes." I swallowed hard. "You didn't?" "Because I didn't send them." There was a pause, long, uneasy. "Then someone inside Voltaris did," he said finally. "Be careful." The line went dead. I stared at my reflection on the black screen, older, thinner, tired. The light from the window framed me like a ghost in a machine. I looked worn down. Yes, but my eyes, they still had voltage. Something inside me shifted then. Suspicion hardened into focus. I reopened the falsified email, checking the digital signature. Embedded metadata confirmed my instincts. The message had been drafted from a shared console in the executive wing. Minutes later. Another message came through, this time from my contact at Helix Grid. Forwarding original email headers. You'll want to keep these, he wrote. Attached was a clean copy proof of the forgery, time-stamped and traceable. I saved the file to an external drive, closed the laptop, and exhaled slowly. The attack wasn't subtle anymore. It was calculated, personal. The night outside buzzed with electricity, steady and indifferent. Inside, I felt the same calm on the surface, current building underneath. By the time I walked into the internal audit office, I'd already rehearsed the entire conversation in my head. No drama, no speeches, just data. Proof was the only language Voltaris still understood. The department was buried deep in the lower floors of headquarters, far from the glass and marble above. The walls here were plain, the air cold, a place built for truth, not comfort. Marianne Tull, head of the audit division, looked up as I entered. Early 40s, sharp eyes behind square glasses, posture too straight for someone who trusted easily. She motioned for me to sit. Her tone clipped. Mr. Drayton, I understand you requested a review related to data tampering. I nodded, placing the brown envelope on her desk. Everything you'll need is in there: access logs, timestamp screenshots, and packet traces from the executive subnet. She didn't open it immediately. Before we begin, she said, you should know that these kinds of claims often come from personal disagreements. You've had some recent history with the Voss family. I need to be sure this isn't retaliation. For a second, I just watched her. The hum from the fluorescent light above flickered, rhythmic and low. I'd been through enough investigations to recognize the pattern doubt first, verification later, calmly. I slid the second envelope across the table, the leather-bound notebook. No theories, I said evenly. No motives, just facts. And facts don't take sides. That line hung in the air longer than I expected. Marianne finally reached for the files. She pulled out the printed log sheets, scanning the rows of IP addresses and login times. Her expression shifted, the practiced skepticism softening into something closer to concern. These are encrypted. They match the company's internal SHA chain. I said, I backed them before the tampering continued. You can verify the keys yourself. She tapped a pen against the desk, studying me for a moment. You're serious about this? I met her gaze. I've been serious since the day I watched the company lose power to people who don't understand how current works. Something in that made her pause. Then, quietly, she said, we'll look into it. I left her office with no promises, only the quiet satisfaction that the circuit had been connected. Someone was finally listening. Hours later, Arthur Voss called Marianne privately. I wasn't supposed to know what he said, but word travels fast in Voltaris. His instruction was simple, whispered like a live wire. Don't act yet. I want to see how far my son goes. When I heard that, I couldn't help but laugh, not cruelly, just with tired irony. Power runs better, I said to no one in particular. When you stop pretending who's connected. The first trace of hope returned, then quiet, measured and real. Not faith in people, but in consequence, the kind that moves unseen until the lights finally flicker back on. Rumors move faster than current in this place. You can almost feel them humming through the hallways, invisible but charged. By the end of the week, everyone in Voltaris had heard a version of the story that I was unstable, paranoid, difficult to work with, a convenient narrative, neatly packaged, easy to believe when told by a man in a tailored suit with a last name engraved on the building. Ethan Voss had found his next weapon character assassination. He didn't need proof, he just needed whispers. And in corporate environments, whispers were louder than alarms. I kept my composure. I attended meetings, reviewed budgets, approved schedules, all while listening to my own reputation being quietly dismantled. The anger was there. Yes. But it was contained, sealed like voltage behind reinforced glass. I'd learned long ago that explosions accomplish less than a steady current. One afternoon, I passed the executive conference room. The door was slightly ajar, inside. Ethan's voice cut through the low chatter. She's become erratic, he was saying, then corrected himself. He's become erratic, overly defensive. I'm not sure he's fit to manage high-pressure accounts anymore. Another voice, maybe HR, maybe one of his allies, murmured agreement. My pulse slowed, not sped up. I pulled out my phone, thumbed the record button, and let it capture every self-incriminating word. He sounded calm, confident, almost rehearsed. When the conversation ended, I walked away, the recording safely tucked away like a fuse I wasn't ready to light. That evening, as I packed up to leave, a soft voice broke through the hum of machines. "Sir," someone whispered. I turned. It was Ben, one of the youngest engineers on the maintenance team, barely 30. Face still carrying that mix of hope and exhaustion you only see in people who still believe systems can be fixed. He slipped a small USB drive into my hand. "What's this?" I asked quietly. "Proof," he said. "We've been tracking changes in the internal mail server. We believe you." Then he was gone, disappearing down the corridor before I could thank him. Back at my desk, I copied the data, matched it with my recording, and sent both to a private contact in the ethics committee. I didn't expect an immediate response, but corporate systems have a way of moving fast when self-preservation is at stake. The next morning, the storm hit. The leaked audio of Ethan's conversation circulated through internal channels within an hour. Department heads stopped mid-sentence, meetings froze, people whispered. But now it wasn't about me. It was about him. By noon, the entire building felt different, tense, electrified. The lights flickered once, then twice, as if the grid itself was reacting to the shock, and for the first time in weeks. The silence that followed didn't feel like isolation. It felt like vindication. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, the kind of sterile cold you only get when truth is about to be dissected under fluorescent light. The long table gleamed like polished steel, lined with screens, files, and faces pretending neutrality. Ethan Voss sat across from me, jaw tight, confidence forced. Beside him, his father Arthur leaned forward, the weight of leadership heavy in his shoulders. At the far end, the internal audit team adjusted cables, preparing the evidence. I took my seat without a word. When the lights dimmed, the first display flickered to life login records, digital footprints, timestamps, a clean chain of evidence, undeniable and deliberate. Marianne Tull, the head of audit, spoke first. Each unauthorized edit originated from the executive subnet, linked to credentials under Ethan Voss's authorization pool. Ethan's voice sliced through the air. "That's impossible. Anyone could have spoofed my access. This is a setup." I kept my hands folded on the table, calm, unmoving. The hum of the projector filled the silence between us. I'd waited weeks for this moment, not for revenge, but for equilibrium. Next came the audio. His voice played across the speakers. Unmistakable. "She's become erratic, overly defensive, not fit to lead anymore, except this time." The pronoun correction was loud and clear. The room didn't move. Ethan shifted in his chair, face blanching under the glow of the screen. "That's edited," he said weakly. "You can't trust recordings." Marianne stopped the playback. "The metadata confirms it's authentic." He turned toward me, eyes narrowing. "You did this, didn't you? You leaked." I finally looked at him. My voice was steady, every syllable cutting clean. "You tried to disconnect me, Ethan, but you forgot I built the circuit. It wasn't anger that fueled the words, it was precision, the kind of clarity that comes when the voltage finally finds its path." Arthur stood slowly, every movement deliberate. The air in the room tightened. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of final judgment. "I gave you power," he said, eyes fixed on his son, "and you turned it into a warning." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the sentence never formed. Arthur raised his hand, stopping him mid-breath. "Effective immediately," he said. Turning to the audit team, "Ethan Voss is suspended pending full disciplinary review." The words landed with the precision of a circuit breaker snapping into place. No one spoke, not the auditors, not Arthur, not me. Only the low whir of the air conditioner filled the room, a steady, electric whisper running through the silence like wind along high-voltage lines. I didn't smile. Justice rarely feels clean. It just hums quietly, endlessly until the system resets itself again. 2 weeks later. The company finally exhaled. The official announcement arrived early on a Monday morning. Dropped into inboxes like an automated weather alert, Ethan Voss has been terminated for ethical misconduct. Effective immediately. No drama, no emotion, just a sterile sentence that carried the quiet weight of finality. Around the office, no one spoke his name out loud, but the air felt lighter, as if the static had finally cleared from the line for the first time in months. I allowed myself to breathe. The tension that had settled in my shoulders began to fade, replaced by a strange, steady calm. Vindication didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence, a cleaner kind. By afternoon, I received a call from Arthur Voss. His voice sounded less like a CEO and more like a man who had finally stopped holding his breath. "Caleb," he said, "come up to my office. There's something we need to discuss." The elevator ride to the top floor was unusually quiet. The hum of machinery felt softer now, the building somehow at peace. When I stepped inside Arthur's office, the blinds were half open, sunlight cutting across his desk like clean lines on a blueprint. He stood as I entered, a folder in his hand. "You've done more than anyone could have asked," he began. "You exposed a system failure and fixed it while standing in the fire." He slid the folder toward me. "I want you to take this." Inside was a formal letter, Director of Strategic Operations. Effective immediately. The title was heavy, even noble, but as I read it, all I could think about were the people who hadn't made it this far, the quiet departures, the forced resignations, the engineers and analysts who had been written off when Ethan wanted control. I closed the folder carefully. "I appreciate this," I said, meeting his eyes, "but titles won't repair what he broke. If we're going to rebuild Voltaris, we start with the people he pushed out. Bring them back, give them the chance to finish what they started." Arthur was silent for a moment. Then, to my surprise, he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, his voice low but firm. "Let's rebuild the grid from within." He signed the approval right then and there, a single pen stroke that felt more powerful than any promotion. As I left his office, I paused by the window overlooking the city. The Voltaris logo gleamed across the skyline, brighter now, steadier, below. The streets pulsed with the quiet rhythm of power flowing unseen through cables and circuits restored, balanced, alive, for the first time in a long while. I felt the same. The months that followed moved in steady rhythm, like the hum of a stable current. Voltaris was no longer a company built on fear, but one rediscovering balance. I began the work quietly, not with grand speeches or new slogans, but through structure. Policies became transparent, performance reviews went public. I opened an anonymous feedback line, giving employees a way to speak without fear of voltage from above. In training sessions, I brought engineers, analysts, and interns into the same room. We spoke about integrity, design flaws, and the cost of silence. It wasn't about efficiency anymore, it was about conscience. Watching them talk, laugh, and challenge one another. I saw what Voltaris could have been all along, a living grid, powered by people instead of ego. One afternoon, sunlight spilled through the hallway as I passed the conference room where I'd once been fired. The door was open, the air still. I stopped, hand brushing against the glass, remembering the sting of that day, the silence, the humiliation, the shock that had felt permanent. Now, it was just background noise. I smiled faintly and whispered, "Energy never dies. It just finds a better conductor." Later that week, Arthur called me into his office, holding a document with a grin he couldn't quite hide. "Helix Grid has approved the expansion," he said, sliding the letter across the desk. 5 new countries, but they've added one clause: they'll only proceed if you personally oversee it. For a long moment, I just looked at the page. Vindication didn't roar. It hummed steady, quiet, self-assured. I signed the agreement without ceremony. Outside the window, light from the solar panels washed across the skyline, soft gold on glass. The building seemed to breathe again. So did I, in that stillness. I realized something simple: leadership isn't about control. It's about current. You don't own it, you conduct it. Power, like energy, always seeks balance, and it finds its way back to those who treat it with respect. We had rebuilt Voltaris not by replacing parts, but by realigning principles. The current flowed clean again. If you've ever been cut off, underestimated, or replaced, remember true power doesn't vanish. It waits, quietly, for the right hands to reconnect it. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of justice, redemption, and quiet strength.